Hey everybody, Culturedog Sam Hatch back with another Blu-ray review, and this time we're talking about an Australian Ozploitation flick from Arrow Video. They sent me a preview copy of Dead End Drive-In. Dead End Drive-In is a picture from the mid-'80s by pretty prolific horror director Brian Trenchard-Smith. It's notable for being a favorite of Quentin Tarantino's, and it is a very cool post-Mad Max, trash film with lots of cars, etc., action. Though at its core, there's a lot of character work and social commentary, etc., which essentially made it a controversial piece. It is not what you may think it is, especially because of the way it was marketed. I've seen one poster for the film with this picture of a person in essentially crow makeup or like looking like Robert Smith or something that isn't featured in the film at all as far as I can tell. It is another not post-apocalyptic but a societal breakdown flick, and it starts off giving you a backstory about how the world is falling into global disarray. And I believe this one took place in 2005. So things aren't great in Australia, nor are they in New York or anywhere else around the world. And it doesn't really rely too much on the danger of that situation. It actually shows you people just trying to kind of carry on living, which is a little bit more realistic than other films of this ilk. And it has Ned Manning, who's really kind of charismatic guy, playing this young teen named Krabs. That's his nickname. His real name's Jimmy. There's actually a funny backstory about his name told within the tale, and it shows him, jogging around in this very, polluted environment. And much like a lot of other '80s films that used that kind of gradated filter that has, the orange skyline and stuff, it really works here. It doesn't end up looking, washed out or boring. Paul Murphy is the DP, and this film is gorgeous stuff. 2.35 to 1, which is cool. Interestingly, it was shot in Super 35, which I found out on the commentary track. But it looks amazing. So we follow Jimmy as he runs around his everyday ordeals. He tries to get fit because he's got an older brother who, it's hilarious. There's one scene where he's in the workout room with his older brother, who begins lifting weights for a second and is like, I'm strong enough, why bother? And he's always picking on his little brother for being too scrawny, etc. And his mom also doesn't understand why he's trying to be this big tough guy. And then he's also making food deliveries during the day, which often turns into tussles with local punks, etc. So it does establish a bit of volatility in the environment. And also he runs along with his brother on a job. His brother's a tow truck driver. And there's actually a pretty cool scene where they're going to be vultures, essentially, the first on the scene of a multi-car accident. And the social commentary starts getting lathered on thickly, as in a very Gangs of New York-esque scene, instead of firemen arguing over the right to put out a fire with no actual regard for the safety of the denizens of the building, this one has tow truck drivers fighting for the scrap rights to the cars. And meanwhile, there's all these horribly eviscerated bodies just laying all over the street and hanging out of cars. And then it also establishes the cowboys, these guys who roll in and they're just spastastic freakazoids who are always trying to start trouble. So you have to fight them off and you have to pay off the cops, etc. The news vultures also arrive. The media are shown to be taking advantage of the horrible tragedies going on a daily basis on these lawless roads. And then it also shows Jimmy meeting up with his girlfriend Carmen, played by Natalie McCurry, who was once a Miss Australia and sadly passed away a couple of years ago. And there is mention that he wants to borrow Frank's classic 57 Chevy to go to this drive-in with her and, make out. So eventually they go down the security road, which is loosely explained as a road that doesn't allow any pedestrians on it. And that leads to a drive-in called the Star Drive-In. And Peter Whitford, who was the stage manager in Moulin Rouge, is the manager of this drive-in, named Thompson, also known as Tomo. And it is vaguely explained to you, and there's a lot of clues as to what's going on here, and even Brian Trenchard-Smith acknowledges that he probably should have explained his universe maybe a little bit more thoroughly. And as ham-fisted as the social commentary is, some of the mechanics of this world aren't always explained fully. But there's this option when you go to the drive-in to pay the full, adult fee of $10 or the unemployed fee of $3.50, which you learn later is a trick to lure, young kids and vagrants, etc., into this place to be trapped in a pseudo concentration camp. Quickly after Krabs and Carmen arrive, they're making out in the car, and also cutely, lots of other Brian Trenchard-Smith films are playing on the screen, which I noticed right away. There's film Turkey Shoot, which actually features Mad Max's boss in a bit of evisceration in there, and a few other films like Man from Hong Kong with George Lazenby, etc. But those films on the screen are always referencing what's going on in this film as well, which is pretty clever. And in fact, in the commentary track, Brian mentions that he got away with adding in some stuff that was cut from the film because of gore. He added it back into this film as seen on the projection on the screen inside the drive-in, which is pretty cool. But anyways, they're snogging and their car gets jacked. Somebody comes and takes the wheels. So Krabs goes researching and finds that these cops are possibly behind this. So they're trapped there. The manager has no way to help them, doesn't want to get any information going on. And the next day they wake up and realize that there's still tons of people inside this drive-in. And they see all these fires going and these cars being turned into makeshift hovels. And you realize that they're trapped there. So there's a bit of a slow burn with that. From that point on, you realize this could get extremely tiresome because having seen trash cinema and straight to VHS movies back in the day, they promise a big adventure on the poster, and then usually like 10 15 minutes in, they give you trite drama and boring social dynamics for about 60-65 minutes before something interesting happens. And there is a bit of that at play in this film because it does eschew the action for quite some time. There's a few fights, etc. But this concentration camp isn't really a violent, terrifying prison. It's not Escape from New York or anything like that. It actually goes out of its way to make it comfortable in a sense because it's largely taking in teens and young adults and feeding them what they like, trash food, trash pop culture, and new wave music, etc., and showing them these horrible films every night. And so it makes them actually at home. You have a character like Carmen, Natalie McCurry's character, who is actively on the run from her mom. Her mom's got APBs out for her, so she doesn't want the manager at the place to notify her family. So it quickly sets up this status quo of these people being imprisoned, but ultimately not caring because it's a prison that serves their needs, and why ultimately leave? There's nothing really that great out there. So Krabs is this one maniac, the one sane guy who's perceived as insane by everybody else here because he wants to escape and realizes that there's high walls surrounding this place with electrified barbed wire, etc. The cops are always crawling around causing trouble, and they have these really cool cop cars. Everything's very Mad Maxian in terms of car designs because you have the Australian variants of cars that we never saw here in the States, so it has that same look. But the cop cars have this cool glow, like the police writing on the front of the car and the back cabin, all light up. And there's usually like some sort of dry ice in the bed of the pickup truck, kind of glowing and pulsating. Really, really cool looking. And it establishes these characters getting integrated in this society, and in the case of Krabs, rejecting it. It drops a lot of thought bombs. It doesn't always follow through on them. There's the nature of the racism of these characters when Asians are trucked in, and that ultimately goes nowhere. And I guess that was ill-received by critics at the time. But in my case, it didn't really mind that it was getting at the xenophobia by these characters, but it didn't really establish anything with it. There is one scene where Krabs protects a gentleman trying to use a bathroom from the neo-Aryan guys that he's befriended, sort of. And then there's this whole scene where everybody goes into this cafeteria to have this racist meeting, and you don't really ever see their victims again throughout the rest of the film. And that meeting is really just a way to get everybody in one space to allow all this other stuff outside of that area to happen, and explosions, etc. So yeah, that largely goes nowhere, but it's a real stylish film. It's got a kind of surrealistic vibe to it, this nightmarish world where you're trapped somewhere, you want to get out, nobody wants you to get out, even the people on your side. So yeah, you really get a feel for Ned Manning's character, and like I said, he's got a ton of charisma, and it carries through. I watched this film probably 3 times in the last week alone. It's got a real cool vibe to it, and totally glad I saw it. I never heard of it before now. So Dead End Drive-In, awesome stuff. Like my other Arrow stuff, I got a pre-production copy of the film, so it just looks like that. I didn't have access to the final packaging, but it does have a reversible cover with the original artwork and newly commissioned artwork by Chris Malbone, and it's got stereo audio, but the audio is pretty cool. It's got a lot of good 80s music revealed in the commentary track. They actually just paid a blanket fee to an Australian record company to kind of use whatever they had on their roster. So they would just give them the B-sides and the also-rans, and not the main hits from their artists. But bands like Hunters and Collectors, etc. are in here. So it's got a good 80s vibe to it, and that may date it some, but it's also really fun, and I thought it imbued the film with a good 80s rock edge. And there are some decent explosions and stuff and gunshots, but it's it's not Heat level reference quality. The visuals are fantastic. I mentioned before, Paul Murphy's cinematography is just bazonkers gorgeous. It's amazing how good this film looks. And Brian Trenchard-Smith eventually went on to do a lot of stuff like Leprechaun sequels, and is doing things now more in 16:9 on a regular basis. But this thing is definitely meant to be balls out, theatrical, wide, and aggressive. And he really wanted to go for a deep focus in a lot of shots, so there's fires and all sorts of extras going on to the horizon, etc. It's got a great look to it. The colors are amazing. Rich contrast. The blacks are very black. A lot of great looking night shots, and the daytime shots look awesome too. And like I said, even the gradated filters that they used had a real cool look to it. The titles had a kind of neon-esque vibe to them, to reference the Star Drive-In Theater. Everything about this film is gobsmackingly gorgeous, really. They had a new 2K restoration from the original film materials, and very pretty film. Definitely much more of a visual feast than the Mad Max films were. The pretty cool extras on here. There's not the usual half-hour long featurette gathering the cast and crew together to discuss the film, which is too bad, because those are always a ton of fun. But in this case, you get a couple of other Trenchard-Smith's other things, including a classic television documentary on the stunts of the film and their Australian stunt performers, etc. Then there's also a 1978 public information film called Hospitals Don't Burn Down. And, the main companion piece to the film itself is the commentary track from Brian Trenchard-Smith. And it's super cool. He is a really fun, entertaining guy to listen to. He's self-deprecating at times, and is very, very honest about what he felt about the film that worked and didn't work. And it really reminded me a lot of John Carpenter's better commentary tracks. Not to say that commentary tracks on big, lush Hollywood productions aren't worthy, but it's far more inspiring to hear commentary tracks from kind of young, hungry filmmakers, or talking about when they were young, hungry filmmakers doing low-budget films, because you often hear the tales of how they overcame the budget and how that forced them to be creative. And this is one of them. Trenchard-Smith gets into every element of the production, talks about how they reused certain actors in different scenes, and is not ashamed of the cheapness of it, and is very honest about what he thinks didn't work. Well, one character waited a little bit too long to do this. Sometimes he establishes shocks or scares before they happen, and regrets that. There's just so many cool little pieces that helps you appreciate the thought put into the film. There's a scene where Krabs is walking around the premises, and Trenchard-Smith thought it would be so cool to show you the reel changes, because this was before reels were just all spliced together and delivered on a big platter. And he walks right in front of the projection booth as a reel change happens. Super cool. And there's another great scene in the projection booth later where he's helping out Thompson and kind of cozying up to him in a fashion, sharing a beer with him. And there's this pretty huge window behind the two characters, and it shows you that right at the edge of the grounds of this drive-in is a pretty, looks well-to-do suburban housing community. And the director is just completely beside himself because he didn't have the foresight to just put something simple up, like a pair of curtains or drapes, and pull them down to the level that you could see the deep focus of all the denizens of the drive-in behind the main characters, and then not have the reveal of the community behind it, because it's supposed to be this remote location, way off the security road, etc. So there's occasional moments like that, which is really, really cool, because he explains the shortcomings, not that they undo what's cool about the film. And then, he lets you know about some other ideas that they had that they didn't put out there. He mentions about how it was based on a short story by Peter Carey and how they had to diverge from that at points. And really cool. It's definitely like a film school 101 commentary track, which are my absolute favorite commentary tracks. And he's certainly proud of the film, which is also very cool. And he definitely recommends other films of his for you to check out. So now I got to check out Turkey Shoot and The Man from Hong Kong especially. But Dead End Drive-In, really cool. It's got a very Australian spirit to it, and I can't believe I never heard of it until now. But super gorgeous flick, and fun, charismatic, and it may be loaded with tons of goofy social commentary about teens and junk culture and racism, etc. like that. But it's definitely worth a watch. So check it out. Cheers, everybody.